Well, it's that time of the year when everybody is looking anxiously ahead at what the budget is going to actually present for a billion-plus population. It's one of the most important days of the year. There are huge expectations, but with elections around the corner, there is a thought that this could be an election budget. Is that good news for so many across the country? What are some of the implications? We've got a fabulous panel of CII representatives. We've got Mr. Dinesh, the President. We've got Chandrajit Banerjee, the Director General, and the incoming President, Mr. Sanjeev Puri as well. He is, of course, the MD of ITC. Gentlemen, before I come to you, I think it's important, let's talk a little bit about the macro story of India and then get into what we all hope will be good news. I was just going through the Indian economy report by the Chief Economic Advisor, and Mr. Dinesh, this question is for you. And it says, it's an interesting quote, it's one thing for India to grow at 8 to 9% when the rest of the world economy is growing at 4%, something completely different for India to grow at 7% plus when the rest of the world is struggling at just 2%. The point is, there is qualitative growth, not just the numbers, which is what defines India at this stage. Would you agree?
100% agree with that. And I think there are 2-3 reasons as to why that is so, right? The focus on doing the right things to make India competitive. I think that is really what has happened, and that is what is really differentiating us as we speak today. Secondly, if you look at the both from a ease and cost, I think the digitization journey which India has undertaken, both from a digital public infrastructure and the usage of the digital public infrastructure for the benefit of the common man, I think is, I would call it incomparable. So that is a differentiator for India. So in the background of whatever is happening, both from a geopolitical angle as well as other countries, the way in which they responded to the COVID crisis and therefore have placed themselves in a tight situation with regard to how they are responding to the newer things which are new issues which happen, is something which I think India has actually not just placed itself in the most advantageous position, but I would call it planned for it in the right way. So therefore, that's a very correct statement. And having said that, I think as you would have seen, the cynosure of the whole world or the eyes of the whole world is on India because of these 3 factors. The one final comment I will make is that this does present a golden opportunity both for geopolitical reasons and for the economic growth opportunity which India is offering.
Mr. Puri's report also talks about supply chain disruptions, and this is a reality. We see marine traffic in the Red Sea being affected. This could have a huge impact on India's economic growth, while logistics prices will go up, fuel prices could go up, trade flows could be impacted. Is that a concern for India going forward, even as we talk about 7% plus?
It is certainly a concern, no doubt about it, because it's both relating to input and output, so it's a concern. But I think the good part is that a lot of the economy is dependent on domestic consumption. It's dependent on domestic investments, public investments, and these have all happened. The government has been tremendous amount of foresight to ramp that up at the right time to make the economy very resilient from a situation where it was in a very relatively weaker spot. So it's certainly going to impact. But I think as we have seen in the past, these disruptions did happen during COVID period and following that as well. But India managed this situation much better than the rest of the world. I mean, it's quite unusual to find that the inflation in India is actually much better managed than the rest of the world. Right. If you look at the manner in which vaccinations have been managed, the manner in which we've managed our energy security during those difficult times, I think is exemplary. No other country has been able to manage it like that. I think it's the agility, the foresight that the policymakers have brought in, and also the sense of enterprise in India, the resilience that Indians have as such, monetary policy, fiscal policy, I think very well thought through and very well tailored to the context and the situation. So I do believe that these challenges, we are living in a world with uncertainty and we'll have to respond to these challenges, and I do suspect that the past gives us a reason to believe that we will manage it more effectively than the rest of the world. But yes, it's a monitorable.
Mr. Banerjee, we were at the World Economic Forum recently. Artificial intelligence was very much a point of conversation, and in this report by the Chief Economic Advisor, there is a sense that countries exporting digital services, which is India, I mean among many, we are a global leader in that sense, could be affected by the onset of artificial intelligence, because these are technologies which may be able to replicate what we offer in terms of exports. So as far as our digital economy is concerned, again, I use the word concern. Is there one?
So I'll answer it, referring to your previous questions about the global uncertainties. And if you see in the last decade, the type of expansion that we have seen in our manufacturing exports in spite of the uncertainties that you talked about, global uncertainties, we have seen a 50% growth and a 120% growth in the services exports. So that's the way, if you see the statement, economic statement, that's the way we have been able to navigate through the global uncertainties. Staying on with the global uncertainties, so we see a diversification of our export basket pretty much strongly, even geographies. The third part of it is we are also seeing a lot in terms of the type of trade agreements India is trying to do very aggressively in certain geographies, which are where we find our products having a much easier destination. So having said that, and now coming to your question on artificial intelligence and you see that the entire digitization story or the digital transformation story of India, its own story in India is a very strong story itself. Now, I do think that, therefore, it's just not that it has been a very strong story, which is our story of how that has been has led to an inclusive sort of a growth, and that's where we have seen a large number of people below at the bottom of the pyramid really benefit from our digital story is something which the world has been looking at. Yeah. AI specifically, I think there is a lot to do, and combining it with your story of your global uncertainties, I would think that we would really need to see how AI could be used for advantage of the common man. It really also gives us a huge opportunity of having phenomenal data in the system, which again can be returned back for benefits to the common man. We need to see how we are seeing large companies doing it anyway. We need to see how we are aiding smaller companies to get that type of, now what is SME requiring today? Very different from what they were requiring yesterday. So they are requiring technology upgradation in terms of digital transformation, AI into them, and even for the country to see how the entire AI could be inclusive. We probably need an AI policy, a national policy on AI, an AI mission, so to say. We had a national manufacturing mission some time back, maybe a national AI mission, so to get in. And last point that is, it's not just AI. If you really look at the global uncertainties, we also need alliances. We also need to understand areas of critical minerals, etc. And I would think that these are topics which we would see emerging as important imperatives for us as we go along.
That seamlessly, last point, goes into semiconductors. And again, that fits into the entire thinking of India on having resilient supply chains. I'm not sure this is directly linked to the budget coming up, but perhaps they may be mentioned in the budget, or perhaps certain benefits given to those looking to establish a strong base for semiconductors in India. If we are talking about digital growth as being a key driver of our economic growth, how important is it to have A, resilient supply chains, and B, set up semiconductor hubs in India?
I mean, both are absolutely important, as you rightly said, but if you look at it, there are two elements. First, I'll finish the resilient supply chains, then come to the semiconductor. If you look at resilient supply chains, I think there are two elements to it. One is making sure that we have availability. Second is that we have it available at a reasonable cost, because you still want to be competitive. So that is where I think India has a unique advantage, because you do have a significant domestic market, and therefore as you build scale, that's when actually both competitiveness and costs decreases and increases. Therefore, it's very important for us that we focus on making sure that we get the investments coming in, both from a domestic perspective and also for the global value chains perspective. Yeah. Because if you look at only one element of it, then you won't be really resilient and you won't be cost effective.
Sure.
So I think that this government is very clearly focused on. The PLIs have actually come in that context. They are the sweeteners to make sure that people come in and get stickily involved into the ground. But coming to the semiconductor side of it, I mean, as you know, semiconductor has got three elements to it. And one is what we call the easy bit, which is the assembly and testing, and then we will come into the manufacturing and the design. So if you look at all three coming together, it is not going to happen in 1 year.
Yeah.
So we will have to keep moving into the aspects of first getting, I would call it a foothold or a toehold of the investments coming in. Then as things happen, design anyway, India is a big hub for it.
Sure.
So I don't see that as being a challenge for us in making happen. But you will need maybe a 2-3 year time frame when all of it comes together, and that's a very clear focus for this government as well.
Sure.
To make that happen.
Mr. Puri, climate change adaptation, building resilience and mitigating emissions is something which Indian industry has to embark on. There are no two ways about it. Is there again an incentive that you would look at or look for in the budget to actually enable that to take place on a broad-based level? And secondly, as the MD of one of the largest diversified chains in the country, and in the world in fact, what has ITC done to actually deal with the overall theme of climate change?
Okay. Regarding the first one, let me say that as far as energy transition is concerned, green growth is concerned, I think there are plenty of policy enablers in place. What is it that we would like to see? I think one is that there are certain, we would like to remove the friction at the last mile, because there are some stuff that falls in the realm of the state governments. We have an open access policy, but it has to be implemented at the state level. Because if we remove the frictions across this value chain, then what happens, it can certainly provide further impetus to private capital. Private capital will go with economic viability. Yeah. So the frictions have to be removed. So that piece, I think, needs to fall in place. Good policies from the center, at the state level, it needs to fall in place. There are also some, already initiatives so far as carbon markets, among others that are there. These will act as incentives and disincentives. We need to really implement it, deepen it, expand it to more number of industries over a period of time. So I think the enablers are all there. It's a question of, in certain cases, last mile execution, in certain cases for all of us to start executing it at scale. The piece, I think, where we can do more is the piece on adaptation, because the world will keep on heating up, and we have to learn to live in the hot new world, more extreme weather events. So how do we do resilience in agriculture, resilience in urban infrastructure, and so on and so forth? I think that's the piece we need to do more on. And you see, how we have done it in our own company is pretty much similar. It's around green infrastructure, green buildings, renewable energy. It's around nature-based solutions, biodiversity. It's around water. It's also around building adaptation for our manufacturing site and also for the agri-value chain. So it's a combination of all of these things that we are doing. And these are what I think needs to be accelerated, certainly in the economy, with the right policy interventions, many of which I think are all in place. It's a question of carrying it forward.
Yeah. Mr. Banerjee, let's talk specifically about budget expectations. We all have budget expectations. I think the large number of our viewers would have one question in mind: income tax slabs. This, of course, comes just before elections. Do you believe that that there is a case for that to take place with or without elections?
Yes, without election, this being an interim budget, for every budget we have that expectation what will happen in the tax front of it, as you know. Now, I would think one of the most important drivers of our growth of our economy has been consumption, and it's a consumption-led economy. And I think at this point in time, there is a huge opportunity for us to get that fillip through income tax benefits that one can really look at, especially when you see that we can get a huge fillip done in the rural economy, so to say. So these could be some strong enablers for us to really get prepared for the next actual budget to come. So I don't see that there is no room for that. So I would definitely expect it, and I think it's a good expectation to have. Consumption needs to be boosted, rural economy needs to be focused upon, and so yes, direct taxes, one would expect much to happen on that.
These sort of go hand in hand, skill development and employment generation. Again, it's important from a political standpoint for any government ahead of the elections, but it makes sound economic sense, particularly given our demographic dividend, which is huge. We need to take advantage of our young working population. How important is it for us to have something substantive in this budget for skill development and link that, sir, to job creation?
Very, very relevant. And in fact, from CIS perspective, we have actually recommended an employment-linked incentive plan, like the production-linked incentive plan, because we believe there are various sectors which actually accentuate and create better competitiveness for even the manufacturing sector, where there is significant employment generation possible. So there, it's a question of, like sectors like logistics, tourism, health, etc. Yeah. So if you bring under that bucket and then say that is skills required to be imparted and supported, yes, 100%. I think it's a joint responsibility of the government and the corporates to really work together to make that happen. Today we have all the building blocks put in place through both the education ministry and the financial allocation for the same. The question is, how do we make sure that we really get to big scale?
Sure.
Because we are speaking about making that happen not just in small numbers, but in really large numbers. And like I said, if you combine the PLI, the employment-linked incentive and the skill building together, you have all the, I would call it, the three pillars built in a very strong manner, which I think is already happening. So I think I see that this budget or the interim budget will make sure that the further continued support of all these three pillars are going to happen.
You know, as I was hearing that answer, I was just thinking about one tiny part of our economy which is so important. Auto mechanics. There are mechanics who fix cars across the country, any number of cars on the road. There is no skill development over there for auto mechanics. They come to the job, they learn on the job. Isn't it important for sectors, and I'm just given one example, where people are actually trained, upskilled, educated at the level of schools perhaps going forward, or diploma courses across the board, so that people are educated and trained before they can actually get into the economy?
No, it's a very, very good point. In fact, there have been certain good developments as far as this is concerned. I think on one hand, we see the new national education policy, which is also focusing on the skill aspects of it rather than just the degrees and so on and so forth. So that's certainly very, very vital. The government has also been putting thrust on skilling. There is this piece that is on apprenticeship also, where after some education you participate with the industry. So plenty of enablers in place. I think given the size of the problem, I think we need to do a lot more.
Yeah.
I think it has to be done in a partnership model, and I think the government has been very proactive in developing, co-opting the private sector as a partner. So I think collectively we can come together and do more on it. There are a lot of private initiatives. So how do we kind of synergize? CII itself is focusing on it. We do have our own centers for this as well. All in all, very important point. I think in the right direction. It's a question of how do we kind of scale it up. I might also add that there is also a potential of using the digital network to accelerate this. See, if you look at certain models, aggregator models that have emerged for usual household services deployment.
Yeah.
Right? Now that model embeds training, it embeds market access, right? But it's at a certain scale and at a certain cost. I think if we can use, for example, platforms like ONDC,
yes,
to connect up these micro enterprises, create that ecosystem where there is somebody who's providing skill, there is somebody who's providing financial assistance, and through that network he also has consumer access, customer access. Yeah. I think it will do a lot of good for enablement across.
Affordable housing is another scheme which, or an area of the economy which is so important. There are schemes announced every single time. But given the cost of housing, if you look at our huge middle class in cities like Delhi, where the costs are almost seem disproportionate, do you believe this is another area where the government needs to do something in this budget?
So there are two things, here. So you asked the previous question to me about what can we do on income tax.
Yes.
So when you really do something on income tax and you really look at affordable housing, there is a link there, because that's a segment where we will find there's a possibility of huge growth in India, real estate, and that particular growth, which can actually come about when you make it affordable. It triggers a large number of sectors. Actually, a real estate sector can trigger off something in one of the CIA studies a couple of years back. We talked about 200 plus other sectors getting activated through it. I mean, cement, a whole lot of it, steel, etc. So obviously, it's a huge boost to the economy that it can have. And the third part of it is the employment that it can generate. So which again creates demand, etc. So I would think that we would really need to look at sectors of that kind which can be boosted through what you said. If we can see some loosening of the income tax rate, so to say, which triggers off sectors which are also very employment generative, and of course has trigger effects across sectors.
Mr. Dinesh, the new tax regime has been popular in some circles, quite unpopular in other areas. Some of the schemes which actually existed, for example, saving schemes, which appear to have been somewhat disincentivized as far as the new tax regime is concerned. A, do you believe there needs to be more clarity in the new tax regime? Are you looking for something additional or something new to make it more attractive?
No, I think CIA's view has been very simple. Keep it simple, right? So if you reduce...
And is it, in your opinion, simple enough?
No, I mean, obviously you can always keep suggesting improvements to make it simple enough. But if you look at from a relative taxation perspective, I think once you have a lower rate of tax, I think that's the important thing, because otherwise you're really trying to track and I would call it optimize, rather than looking at it as a simple solution. So the example, the 15% tax rate which was introduced for companies which are coming in for manufacturing is a very attractive rate of tax, which I think is almost best in class in the world. So if we go and say that we want to tinker with something beyond that, I don't think it makes sense.
Sure. So education, and I'm just quickly going through these sectors which are so important. The education sector, the last time we had the highest ever allocation of 1.12 lakh crores for the education sector. Again, an area of huge priority. It feeds into our ambitions as a nation. How critical is this sector for you and this budget?
It is absolutely critical for the future of the economy. For us to really get the demographic dividend, I think education is a fundamental building block. And in CII, we've been saying from about roughly 2% or so investments, we certainly need to go to about 2.5 to 3%. And that's the kind of trajectory it has to take. We need to make it more, leverage digital more. We need to leverage more creative methods. And I'm aware that government is also promoting some creative alternatives that have been developed. So multifaceted, this whole area has to be dealt in, and extremely critical for us to leverage the demographic dividend. Services is a big opportunity, and education is fundamental to it.
And one final question, the healthcare sector. Again, this is an area where the middle class or anybody across the country would look for potential benefits, tax saving benefits, etc., etc. There are already quite a few. What are your expectations of the healthcare sector?
So, I would think that, again, affordable healthcare and affordable education and affordable higher education, this is something that we would look forward to not only in the budget but also beyond budget, and I think that's going to be critical. And in that I would like to also see a focus on rural health and rural healthcare in the rural areas, and healthcare and education in the rural areas linked. And it's so very important for us to give affordable. Today there are schemes which have been started by the government which really leads a lot of access or a lot of affordability of many people down at the bottom of the pyramid to healthcare, and some of them are really working very well. What we need is healthcare infrastructure upgraded especially in the rural areas and the districts. And if many of it could, because you need an entire ecosystem to develop, like paramedics, the nurses, etc., availability of all of them in these areas areas, and sometimes it is going to be difficult for a country as vast as India. So I think the best thing that we could do is to use the usage of technology. Say, for instance, EICUs to be critically available in a far-flung district. So I would think that leveraging technology to see how we are able to really reach healthcare to the would be very important. And last point on that, we had this NABFID, which was the National Infrastructure Bank. If that the ambit of that could be increased into social sectors like education and health, I think we would see the trigger effect to be quite substantial.
Final set of questions. I'm going to put all three of you gentlemen on the spot. You can repeat your answers. You don't have to look for different sectors of the economy. Your top two expectations, sir, and I'll ask you the same question.
One is I would like to see continuity, more of the same. And in terms of areas where, focus could be strengthened, I would say it's rural and rural holistically.
Continuity and a focus on rural areas.
Continuity on infrastructure and capex and MSME support.
Okay, so that's three areas, but fair enough.
So I'll repeat, rural for areas, and in rural I would see education and health. And the second is at the end of the budget speech, you and I should be able to see it gives us a sort of a roadmap for the next few years in terms of certainty and in terms of confidence, getting confidence into in the economy.
Confidence, certainty. These are themes which I sort of take back from all of you. I'd like to thank you all very much for speaking to us. So many expectations. It is such a vast country and with such a vast economy and so many sectors. But the finance minister is going to have her work cut out for her. By this time tomorrow, we'll get a clear idea of what exactly is in line, in tune for so many across our country. Will it be a blockbuster budget? Let's wait and see.